So, this is Eat the Strawberry. This is another episode of my podcast, and my name is Faolan. And on today's episode, I want to talk about something that historically has been really hard for me, and that is saying no. There's a lot of talk about saying no. Tim Ferriss, one of my favorite podcasters and writers, is actually writing a book about it right now, about how to say no well. And it's something that I have not really done a lot of in my life. I have quit a lot of things, but I've not from the get-go said, this isn't going to work for me, this isn't right for me. And I think that the reason that that's true for me is that often saying no has felt like a dangerous place to be, because if I say no, there's a risk of damaging a relationship, is the story that I've carried for a long time. There's a risk of being perceived as bad or wrong. And this word no carries a lot of energy in it. It's firm and it's the end, it's period. You know, no period is a complete sentence, as some consent fanatics say, which is true. You know, to say no is a complete sentence. And yet, it requires sometimes a lot of skill and self-knowing to know how to say no well and also when to say no. And for my part, I don't get it perfect all the time, and both in the delivery and also in the discernment of when I'm going to say it. But one of the core things that I've really been leaning into recently is that the right relationships and the right opportunities will actually work through a no. And a story my grandma told me last night actually popped up in my head just now, so I'll share it with you, which is that she was called when she was younger from some people who were hiring for her to be a teacher. And they called and they said, can you make it in tomorrow? And she was away on vacation with her family, and she said, no, I can't make it. And then they said, okay, well, you don't get the job. And they never called her back. And we were reflecting on how, you know, the right opportunity wouldn't just go away at the first no. And at the same time, on a flip side of that, when I think about consent, sometimes one no is a no, you know, and the idea of pushing or hearing a no and then continuing to try to get a yes is wrong. And so there's a lot of like different context around this. In the book, Split the Difference by a guy named Chris Voss, he talks about how when you get a no, that's when a negotiation can really start. And this guy was an FBI negotiator, and he said that because yes is really like not always true. Like sometimes people will give you a yes, but they don't actually mean it. They'll give you a yes to shut up. Like if you have a telemarketer on the phone, you might be like, yes, I want that thing, and then hang up the phone. That's not a very good example, but I think that he made a better example than I did. Anyway, no is often when people are getting real. And so for me, I've been learning how to say no, and it's been hard. And I've had to say no to some opportunities that, you know, would have been really fun. But what I'm learning for me right now is that no creates the space for yes. And to say no to some things means that there's room for me in my life to say yes to other things. And it all comes back to my blog that I wrote last week, to this whole search of what does it mean to be authentic? How does it feel, or what does it mean to live a full life, to make the most of life? And a lot of these questions come back to, well, what are we saying yes to? And I think that for me, for a long time, I've said yes to everything, pretty much. And that's led me around the world. It's led me into lots of different loverships and situationships. It's led me down into many different dances and fun festivals. And I think that it's been really special to be able to have said yes to so much. There's that great movie, Yes Man, with Jim Carrey, and I really like the movie because he goes to this like seminar and he's really depressed. And then at the seminar, the guy's like, say yes to everything. And he's like a no guy. And so he starts saying yes, and his life takes this awesome turn, but then eventually it gets like really out of hand and he has to learn that it's okay to say no again. And I didn't really start with like the being a no person, unless you count like me being a teenager and, you know, not wanting to go on hikes, which I guess given how much I love hiking now was me being a no man. But there is this coming back to no in order to come back to yes. And I think that really for me, like learning how to discern in my body what is a no and what is a yes is really important. And we all have different relationships, I think, with no and yes. And so I can't speak for other people's. And there are different frameworks of understanding how we relate to no and yes. Like, for example, one is through human design, and I'm a sacral authority, which means that in this framework, the idea is that my solar plexus will feel a yes or a no. But another way that I do this is I often intuit it based on like where is the openness and where is the shrinking, like where is the expansion and where is the contraction. That's a way that I use a lot of times to determine where I'm headed or what direction I go in. If something feels expansive, I'll often lean into that. And if something feels contractive, then I'll often avert from that. And that's also really complicated and potentially paradoxical because there's a difference between focus and contraction. Focus like does narrow our perspective. It like puts us more into direction. But at the same time, there's like a room for doing that in life when we're saying no to everything that's outside of our scope of focus so that we can say yes to what is inside of it. And some might argue, a past me might have argued that that's actually contraction or that's self-limiting. It's restriction on the self. And in some ways, yes, those things are true, but there is the negative way of putting it, like contraction or self-limitation. And then there's the quote unquote positive way of looking at it, which is like self-containment or even self-liberation from the things that might be distractions from the real purpose of being here. And it all comes back to these protective mechanisms that we have, like, and the thing about protective mechanisms is that they're almost always being used compulsively. And so a big shift is if we can move from compulsivity to intentionality with our no's and our yeses, like if we can not compulsively say yes or compulsively say no to things, but actually really learn how to wait or know how to discern what is a true yes and what is a true no from an intentional, agentic, deeply like aligned place inside of ourselves, then that creates the space for a life in which we're moving forward without regrets. And I think that that's maybe the key piece, because there's really no right or wrong way to live life in an objective sense. Like, sure, there are moral things that we should talk about at some point, but like, you know, you could turn left down a path or you could turn right down a path, and there's really like, you know, what's the difference? In the end of the day, we're all gonna die and go back into the earth. So it's like, is one life objectively better than another life? I don't know. But subjectively, we all have an experience of life that's different than the objective, like analytical perspective. On a subjective level, we all experience life differently. And so, yeah, going down one path might actually feel way better than going down another path. And so I think that is the opportunity that's created from these yeses and nos on the inside, is that if we can really get into touch with who we are and then intentionally bring out our yeses and nos into the outside world, it creates the space for us to move through our lives with real sovereignty and grace. Well, that grace part I want to talk about more, because actually, like, there's a really graceful way to say no, and then there's an ungraceful way to say no. And I am by no means an expert at this. It's still something I'm practicing. But what I've kind of learned is that making it an I statement is really important. Like, something that is talked about in nonviolent communication is, you know, I feel XYZ when, or I felt XYZ when this thing happened, and here's how I'm feeling now, and here's like a request that I might have. Or in authentic relating, a big part of this is about revealing our own experiences. And I think that there's a big difference between trying to control someone else versus actually just saying no. And that's the difference between having a boundary, which is about me and my willingness to be a part of something or not, versus trying to like manipulate and control someone else's experience, which is really still about me, but I've used them for myself. Versus in a boundaried, clean no, there's not an interspersal of energy. There's no intertwinement. It's just a clear, this isn't right for me. And so that allows there to be space for another person to actually grow into who they might want to be. It creates a separation where there can be a deeper and more authentic connection, because it's not built on codependency or this stuck togetherness that a lot of people, including myself, have lived in. And I think that that's also a real big gift of a clean, clear no, is that with a clean, clear no, it creates the opportunity for two people to have their own solitude. Like, there's a couple quotes that come to mind here. One is from Rilke, where he talks about true marriage or true like partnership is being the protector or the guardian of the other person's solitude. It's about creating that space for the other person to live their own life. And then the other one that comes to mind here is from Khalil Gibran, and he talks about the space between and how important that is in marriage. And so with the most intimate, deepest partnerships that there are in the world, actually allowing there to be space between, which is where that no space is what creates the opportunity for two people to become and be who they really are in themselves, instead of becoming this like one enmeshed being. And I think that for me, a lot of my life, I've lived in that like enmeshment, intertwining of me and other, where I become this entity and they become an entity, and we're like living in this relational space versus living in our own independent space that then allows us to relate together from sovereignty and from independence. And like I said, this is still something I'm really learning, but the core thing that I'm unlearning is that saying no will lead to a break of relationship. And that could happen sometimes, but like I said at the beginning, like in a relationship where there is a deeper level of commitment and trust, a no actually is the opportunity to go deeper. It's not the opportunity to end or break, though if it does end or break, it's probably not the right kind of relationship to stay in for a long time anyway. So yeah, these are just some thoughts on like yes and no and sovereignty and compulsion and intention and how all of these things work. And at the core of it, it comes down to somatics, like everything else. And when I say that, I mean that in order to discern a yes or a no, a lot of times there's like, I guess there's 2 or 3 ways to come about this. There's the rational way, and then there's the intuitive way. I think that's the ways that I want to come about this from. There's also like the moral way, or we can give our power to a priest or a guru or someone, and they can tell us what to do, in the same way that we can give it to the law and the law can tell us what to do. And those things have their place, but they're not really that interesting in my life because they're not super agentic. And I think for me, agency is a super important thing. So the agentic ways to do it are either from a rational analytical place or from a intuitive body oriented place. And I think that both are really fine, but I think a lot of people in our society get stuck in their heads a lot. And so there's a romanticization of the cutting off of emotion. And, you know, that has its place. Data is really important in business. Data is really important when making these like financial decisions. But at the same time, like, I don't know, we look at our world and those rational decisions sometimes take us down pretty dark paths as a society. Like maybe the heart or the body is important to listen to too. And when I say that, I don't mean like the trauma in the body that's like really afraid, but the deeper, more still centered part of the body that knows one way or the other. And that's something that takes, I think, honestly, a lifetime of practice to discern more and more what the body is really wanting or needing from a situation, or even what the soul is wanting or needing from a situation, what's right for me. That's a big question of like, how do we know? How do I know what's right for me? How do I help a client know what's right for them? And a lot of that comes down to the somatic experience of being alive and how we can actually feel in our bodies like this truth, this rightness, this expansion, this contraction, this draw toward or this push away. And those things are all really important to listen to and super subtle. So it's really meaningful to have support on that journey and to have someone who can really help me, you know, because I have my own support. People help me understand what is really true for me. And often it takes some time to really understand that. And only for me, when I really know something to be true, can I give a yes or a no that feels deeply authentic and real. If I give a yes or a no before that, it often leads me down a road that doesn't feel super right. Sometimes it's an immediate like, fuck yeah, hell yeah, let's do that. And sometimes it's immediate like, no way, I don't want to do that. So, you know, in those cases, I'll say a yes or no. But if it's ever in that like murky in-between space, I'm finding that the most important thing for me personally to do is to wait and see and to let my emotional roller coaster kind of go and to let it come up and down and see, well, where is it like on Tuesday and where is it on Saturday? And is this a yes then? Is this a yes later? Like, how do I respond to this? And then where is my sovereignty and where is the space that I need to protect so that I can be in myself and of myself? Yeah, those are all things that I have been thinking about and wanted to share with you today. So I hope you enjoyed this, and if you are curious about your own somatic experience of being alive, if you're curious about how to say no well, how to create a little bit more separation in your relationships, these are things that I would love to work with on you. So feel free to reach out, and I would love to talk. I'd love to connect for a coaching intro call, which is always free. And if you think someone else in your life could benefit from this, then please feel free to connect them with me also. I hope you have a really beautiful day. As always, I'm sending lots of blessings, and may you live a very full and happy life. Until next time, this is your host, Faolan Sugarman-Lash at eatthestrawberry.com for our weekly podcast.